Her husband said he was leaving for a 2-year work assignment in Toronto. She cried at the airport, but the moment she got home, he transferred the entire $5 million from their joint savings and filed for divorce. My beautiful family, today I have a very special and beautiful story for you. A story filled with emotions, love, and unforgettable moments. And trust me, you don't want to miss Chapter 9, because a big surprise is waiting for you there. So let's begin this story with love in our hearts. The tears at the airport were real. That was the thing nobody would believe later, when the full story came out and people began reassigning meaning to every detail. They would say she must have known. They would say, a woman like Alex Blackwell doesn't cry like that unless she is performing. But they were wrong, and the wrongness of that assumption was the most important truth in the whole story. She did not know. She stood at that departure gate on a Tuesday morning in October, and she cried because she loved her husband, and she was going to miss him, and the next 2 years felt, in that moment, like an enormous and unwelcome distance between her and the life she had built. She pressed her face against his neck and breathed him in. His cologne, the specific warmth of him, 12 years of ordinary mornings compressed into this one goodbye. And she said, "Come back to me." He said he would. She believed him completely. She drove home through streets she had driven 1,000 times, thinking about nothing more complicated than what she would cook for dinner, how quiet the house would feel tonight, whether she should call her sister Donna, just to have a voice in the room. She was already composing the small adjustments a person makes when shifting from being one half of a household to being its only occupant for a while. Practical thoughts. Ordinary thoughts. The thoughts of a woman who trusted her life completely and had no reason not to. She set her keys on the counter. She made coffee. She opened her laptop to check her email. The bank notification was sitting in her inbox. She read it once and understood nothing. She read it twice and understood something was wrong. She read it a third time, and the word transfer and the number beneath it and the account it had moved into assembled themselves into a meaning so enormous and so impossible that her body responded before her mind did. Her hands went cold. Her coffee cup tipped against the counter. Her breath left her in a single quiet exhale that contained nothing of what she was feeling, because what she was feeling had no sound yet. $5 million. Gone. Moved in a single transaction to a private account bearing only his name. A transaction time-stamped 40 minutes after his plane lifted off the runway. 40 minutes. She had been in the parking garage, still composing herself, still wiping her eyes. He had been 30,000 feet in the air, transferring her life. She called the bank. She spoke to 3 people in sequence, each one patient and apologetic and entirely unable to undo what had been done cleanly and legally by the account holder whose name was also on the account. She sat on hold. She sat in the silence after hold. Her coffee went cold and she did not drink it. Then the email from the attorney arrived. Formal language, orderly paragraphs, the word divorce arranged into sentences around which everything else in the email became peripheral noise. Alex sat at her kitchen table in the house she had decorated and loved and maintained for 12 years, and she tried to locate something recognizable inside herself. What she found was not rage, not grief, not the dramatic unraveling that a moment like this might seem to require. What she found was a profound and disorienting blankness, the specific blankness of a person standing at the edge of something so large they cannot yet see its shape. She had cried at the airport because she loved him. She had cried at the airport while he was already gone, while the plan was already in motion, while the account was already draining. She sat with that for a long time without moving. She picked up her phone and she did not call a lawyer. She did not call Donna. She called her mother, Rosalind, in Atlanta, who had raised 2 daughters alone after their father left, and had built a home of such warmth from so little that her daughters had grown up believing on a cellular level that women were the most durable things on earth. Rosalind answered on the second ring. "Mama," Alex said. Just that one word. And the word contained everything. The airport and the cold coffee and the bank notification and the attorney's email and the 12 years and the morning light still coming through the curtains the way it did every day, regardless of what the day contained. Rosalind did not ask what was wrong. She did not fill the silence with noise. She said, "I'm here. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." Alex told her everything. Slowly, without order, the way a person tells something when the shock is still living in the spaces between words. Her mother listened the way she had always listened, completely, without interrupting, without performing comfort, before the full weight of the thing had been given room to land. When Alex finished, the line was quiet for a moment. "Are you in the house right now?" Rosalind asked. "Yes." "Good," her mother said. "That house is yours until someone tells you otherwise with paper in their hand. You cooked in that kitchen, you planted that garden, and you kept that life standing through more than you were ever given credit for. Don't you move from that house until you are ready, and not 1 minute before." A brief pause, and then her voice shifted into something quieter and more permanent. "And Alex? He took money? Money can be rebuilt. The one thing he cannot take is who you are. He doesn't have the account number for that." After the call ended, Alex sat in the kitchen for a long time. At some point she stood and walked to the window and looked out at the garden she had planted in the second year of the marriage and tended through every season since. The roses, the beds she had shaped, all of it still there, still rooted, entirely indifferent to what had just happened inside the house behind it. She turned away from the window. She went to the drawer where she kept the name of a lawyer a friend had mentioned years ago in passing, for reasons that had seemed entirely theoretical at the time. She dialed the number. Her hands were steady. Tomorrow she would begin. Tonight she simply needed to survive the size of it. And she would, because she had her mother's voice and her garden through the window, and 12 years of quiet, unrecognized proof that she was more capable of building a life than Jameson Smith had ever troubled himself to notice. What do you do in the very first hour after your world falls apart? Who is the first person you call? Chapter 2. The Inventory. She did not sleep. Not in the way insomnia arrives with noise and restlessness. She lay completely still in the bed that was now entirely hers, and let the full shape of what had happened move through her like weather passing through a room. She did not try to stop it or manage it or compress it into something more acceptable. She let it be the size it was. She let it take all night. By the time the first pale light came through the curtains, she had made a decision. Before the lawyers and the phone calls and the machinery of response that would begin today, before any of it, she was going to walk through this house. Every room. She was going to look at what remained. She started in the kitchen. His coffee mug was still in the drying rack, the one she had bought for him from a market years ago that he had used every single morning without comment. She looked at it for a moment, then placed it in the cabinet. She moved through the kitchen slowly, opening drawers, not searching for anything specific, but simply looking with the complete attention of a person taking inventory of a place she had lived in without fully seeing. The living room. His books were gone from the shelves. She noticed this now, whereas she had not noticed the empty spaces in the weeks before the airport, when he must have been removing things gradually, in quantities small enough that she would not register the pattern. She ran her finger along the shelf where his books had been, dust in the outline of where they stood. He had been planning this for longer than she had understood. She stood in the middle of the living room and held that knowledge. Not as a blow, she was past the blow now, had absorbed it in the night, but as information, as a fact to be reckoned with clearly and without the distortion of hope. He had been planning while she was cooking his dinner, while she was managing the household and maintaining the life and doing the quiet, daily, entirely unacknowledged work of keeping everything standing, he had been building an exit with the patience of a man who considered his own comfort the only variable worth optimizing. Two lives running simultaneously, only one of them real. She moved to the spare room and found, on the highest shelf, a portfolio she had not opened in years. She sat on the floor and opened it. She had forgotten the scale of what she had done before the marriage. Not forgotten in the way you forget information. Forgotten in the way you forget a capability when you have not used it in so long that it stops feeling like yours. She turned pages slowly. Proposals she had written, projects she had led, letters of recommendation from people whose names still carried weight in professional rooms she had not stood in for over a decade. She closed the portfolio, held it in her lap. He had taken the money. He had not taken this. He had not taken the books she loved, or the china her grandmother left her, or the garden through the window, or the portfolio on her lap, or the capabilities that had produced it. He had not taken her mother's voice from last night, or her sister's phone number, or any year of the life she had lived before she ever met him. He had taken what he valued. He had left behind what he didn't. And in the precise gap between those two things, in the specific distance between what he had considered worth stealing and what he had walked away from without a second thought, Alex Blackwell began, slowly and clearly, to understand the full truth of what she had been married to. She went to the kitchen and made breakfast. Not a performance of normalcy, just hunger, just the practical need of a body that had not eaten since yesterday morning. She scrambled eggs, she made fresh coffee, she sat at the table and ate with the specific, uncomplicated presence of someone doing one small thing at a time, because small things are what is available, and small things are enough. At 9, she called the lawyer. Her name was Phyllis, a sharp, unhurried woman who listened to the situation with the focused attention of someone who had been doing this work long enough to hear the full shape of a case in the first conversation. When Alex finished, Phyllis said, "He was thorough." A brief pause. "So are we. Come in this afternoon." Before she left the house, Alex carried the portfolio from the spare room to the kitchen table and set it where she would see it when she came home. Not as inspiration, not yet as a plan, simply as a reminder, a record of who she had been that had survived the entire marriage intact, because he had never valued it enough to take it. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked up her keys and walked out of the house with her shoulders straight and her jaw set in the quiet, resolute way of a woman who is carrying something enormous and has decided, without drama or announcement, that she will not be put down by it. What did you hold on to from your life before, the one thing that survived everything? Chapter 3. The People Who Came. Donna arrived the following morning with 2 bags of groceries, a ferocity in her eyes. She was clearly working to keep below the surface, and the particular energy of a younger sister who has been waiting her whole life for the moment when someone wrongs the person she loves most, and she is finally given a legitimate reason to respond. She walked in, set the bags down, looked at Alex for a long moment and said, "Tell me everything. Then I'll put the groceries away." Alex told her everything. Donna listened without interrupting, which was not her natural inclination and therefore cost her something visible. When Alex finished, Donna was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "I never liked him," she said. "You came to the wedding," Alex said. "I wore a dress that didn't fit and smiled until my face hurt," Donna said. "That is not liking someone. That is loving you." She moved to the groceries and began unpacking with the efficient, purposeful energy of a woman channeling something enormous into something useful. What does Phyllis say? She says it's recoverable, the money. Not all at once, but over time and through proceedings. She says he was thorough, but she's seen thorough before. Good. Donna set a container on the counter with a firmness that communicated considerably more than food placement. Eat. Whatever Phyllis needs from you, you need to be fed to provide it. In the days that followed, people arrived the way they arrive when something real has happened to someone real. Not in a flood, not with speeches or performed outrage, but in the quiet and practical ways of people who understand that what crisis actually requires is presence rather than theatre. The woman from 3 houses down, Bernadette, appeared at the door on Thursday with a dish covered in foil and the simple statement that she had made too much and would Alex please take it. She did not ask questions. She did not linger. She came back 2 days later with something else and still did not ask questions. And in that not asking, Alex found something more respectful than any amount of expressed sympathy could have managed. Gloria Haynes called on a Friday afternoon. She was Alex's former mentor, a woman who had watched Alex disappear from the professional world after the marriage with visible but restrained concern, who had sent a brief note years ago that said simply, "When you're ready to come back, call me." The door doesn't close. She called now, not about work, but to say that she had heard, through the quiet channels through which real things travel, and that she wanted Alex to know that she was seen and that the door, as it had always been, remained open. Alex thanked her and meant it deeply, and put the phone down with something warm moving through her chest that had nothing to do with professional possibility and everything to do with being known. On Sunday, her neighbor Raymond, a retired man in his 70s who had grown vegetables in the garden next door for as long as Alex had lived in the house, came to the fence while she was outside and said without preamble, "I saw him loading things in a rental car about 3 weeks ago, late at night." He looked at her with the direct gaze of a man who has decided to say a true thing regardless of its discomfort. Several trips, over different nights. I thought it was strange, but I told myself it wasn't my business. He shook his head slowly. It was my business. You were my neighbor for 12 years, and it was my business. I'm sorry I didn't say something then. Alex stood at the fence long after Raymond went back to his vegetables and thought about those nights. 3 weeks ago, while she was sleeping soundly beside the man she trusted, while she was making his dinner and tending their life, he had been dismantling it in the dark, piece by piece, and nobody had said a word, and she had noticed nothing. She had been so completely, genuinely trusting. She understood this clearly, standing at the fence in the October light. Trusting a person you have chosen to love is not weakness. It is not stupidity. The failure belonged entirely to the person who had exploited it, and she would not accept 1 ounce of the weight of it into her own accounting. That evening she sat at the kitchen table with the portfolio open and a legal pad beside it, and she began writing down everything she knew about herself, her capabilities, her history, the precise shape of what she was good at. Not a plan, not a strategy, just the inventory of a woman who had spent 12 years with her full self in a drawer and was beginning, slowly and with increasing steadiness, to understand what was in there. Donna sat across from her reading and did not disturb the writing. At some point she looked up and said, "You know what I keep thinking? I keep thinking about who you were at 31, the deals you were closing, the way you walked into rooms like you already owned the air inside them." Alex kept writing. "I remember." "She's still in there," Donna said. Not as encouragement. As a statement of observed fact, delivered with the certainty of someone who has been watching from close enough to know. Alex looked up from the legal pad. She looked at her sister across the kitchen table, the sister who had worn an ill-fitting dress and smiled for hours and said nothing for 12 years and was here now with groceries and honesty and the kind of loyalty that does not require an occasion to prove itself. "I know," Alex said, and for the first time since the bank notification, she believed it. "Who showed up for you without being asked? And what did that teach you about who really belongs in your life?" Chapter 4. The Forgiveness. no one expected. Phyllis laid the legal documents across the conference table on a Monday morning with the organized precision of a woman who had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of case. She walked Alex through every element: the transfer, the LLC. Jameson had spent 2 years quietly constructing to shelter business assets, the full financial architecture of a man who had been planning his departure long before Alex had any reason to suspect departure was being considered. 2 years. The LLC had been forming for 2 full years, while she was cooking his dinners, while she was managing every dimension of their shared life, while she had been, by every external measurement, the faithful and devoted wife of a man already designing her erasure. Phyllis walked through it with clinical precision and watched Alex across the table with the careful attention of an attorney assessing her client's readiness. When she finished, Alex was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I trust you completely on the legal strategy. There's something else I need to tell you first. Something that isn't legal strategy, but that will affect how I conduct myself throughout this process." Phyllis waited. "I am going to forgive him," Alex said. "Not in secret. Not privately in a room by myself where nobody sees it. Anyone who asks how I feel about Jameson Smith will hear that I have forgiven him and that I wish him no harm." Phyllis was very still for a moment. "I need you to understand precisely what I mean," Alex said. "It does not mean I am withdrawing from these proceedings. It does not mean I am softening my legal position or declining what is rightfully mine. What it means is that I am refusing to conduct myself as a woman destroyed, because I am not destroyed, and I will not perform destruction for his comfort or for anyone else's narrative." Phyllis looked at her across the conference table for a long moment, and then something shifted in her professional expression. Not warmth exactly, but a deep and specific respect. "That is," Phyllis said carefully, "the most strategically sophisticated position you could take." She paused. "More importantly, it sounds like it's true." "It will be," Alex said. "I'm working toward it." She was working toward it. That was the honest version. Forgiveness was not something she had fully arrived at yet. It was something she had decided to move toward deliberately, without waiting for the feeling to precede the commitment, because she understood that the alternative was to hand Jameson the organizing principle of her interior life for however long the anger lasted. She was not willing to give him that additional territory. He had taken enough. She began saying it out loud, first to Donna, who listened with the expression of a woman physically suppressing a contrary opinion out of respect. "You don't have to agree with it," Alex said. "I know," Donna said. He took $5 million, Alex. He planned this for 2 years while you—" "I know exactly what he was doing while I was what?" Alex said quietly. "That's precisely why I'm choosing this. Because I refuse to let the next year of my life, which belongs to me, be organized around my feelings about a man who has already taken too much of it." Donna was quiet for a long moment. Then, "That might be the most powerful thing you have ever said to me." Word traveled, as it travels in communities where people are genuinely connected. Jameson's name had been circulating quietly, as damaging information circulates when it involves someone well known, and with it the expectation of a certain story. The wronged wife, the fury, the legal battle conducted in the key of public spectacle. What traveled instead confused people. Alex Blackwell was not performing fury. Alex Blackwell had forgiven her husband. Alex Blackwell was moving through her life with a composure so complete and so obviously genuine that it unsettled the people who had been anticipating the more familiar version. She had not deployed forgiveness as a weapon. She had chosen it for herself. The fact that it arrived in Jameson's world with the weight of something considerably more difficult to endure than anger was not her calculation. It was simply what happens when a woman of genuine strength acts from genuine principle. The consequences arrange themselves without any assistance. The request for an informal meeting came through Douglas on a Thursday. Alex discussed it with Phyllis, who gave her opinion without pressure. "You don't owe him a conversation," Phyllis said. "I know," Alex said, "but I want one. Not for him. To close a door properly. I don't leave doors open." She agreed to meet him. Her terms, her location, her time. She spent the evening before not rehearsing what she would say, but simply sitting in the garden with a cup of tea and the October dark around her, and the particular peace of a woman who has located herself inside a difficult situation and found that she is fully equal to it. The roses were past their season, sparse and stripped back, but still rooted, still occupying their ground with complete indifference to the cold. She went to bed early and slept deeply. Have you ever chosen forgiveness not for the other person but entirely for yourself? What did that feel like? Chapter 5. What he left in the dark. She found the box the morning before the meeting. She had been reorganizing the spare room, not packing, simply reclaiming the space into something with its own purpose, when her hand closed around a shoebox on the highest shelf that she did not immediately recognize. She carried it to the bed and opened it. Inside were papers, photographs, a folded document from a period of his life she knew only in outline. A brief engagement before they met ended badly, details she had been given in fragments when she pressed for them in the early years and had eventually stopped pressing because the outline seemed sufficient and she had not wanted to appear threatened by his past. She unfolded the document and read it. It was a legal settlement, a significant amount of money paid by Jameson to his former fiancée as part of an agreement whose final clause contained a non-disclosure provision. Non-disclosure of what? The document did not specify. The amount was substantial. The signatures were in order. The document was dated years before he met Alex. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. She was not the first. The specific shape of what had been done to her, the quiet planning, the gradual financial maneuvering, the exit strategy that protected him and left her with as little claim as possible, had been done before, to another woman, before Alex had ever entered his life, settled into silence by money and a legal clause, and the woman's signature on the bottom of a page. He had not failed in his marriage to Alex. He had executed a pattern he had already developed and tested on someone else. She had not married a man who lost his way. She had married a man who had always been this way. She sat with this for a long time without moving. The shoebox was still open on the bed. Outside the window the morning was grey and still. She let the full dimension of it settle through her without looking away from any of it. The years of love she had given to a construction, the trust she had extended to a performance, the specific and devastating waste of it. Then she put the document in her bag. She called Phyllis. Phyllis listened to the description with the focused silence of an attorney who has just received something important. "I need to see it today," Phyllis said immediately. "I'll bring it this afternoon," Alex said, "after the meeting." She met Jameson at a coffee place near her office at 11. He was already there. She noticed this, and noticed that he stood when she walked in, and noticed the way he looked at her, with the searching, complicated expression of a man trying to read the temperature of a room he had not expected to find himself in. She sat. She ordered coffee. She looked at him across the small table. She had prepared herself for the complicated grief of seeing him, the residue of 12 years she expected to find waiting somewhere behind her composure. Instead, she found something that surprised her with its simplicity. She felt clear, not cold, not angry. Clear, the way a window is clear after rain without distortion, showing the world outside as it actually is. They discussed the practical matters directly, the house, certain shared items. She was fair and precise, and gave nothing away that she was not required to give. He was different from the man she had last seen at the airport, quieter, the easy confidence diminished, the glow of a man certain of his own rightness visibly gone. He was navigating, she could see, the unfamiliar territory of a person who had always believed his own narrative and was encountering, for the first time, the places where it did not hold. At one point he said, "I want you to know that I understand what I did." She looked at him. "I believe you," she said. And she did. She also understood with complete clarity, and the document still in her bag, that understanding was not the same as character, that a man could know what he had done and remain entirely capable of doing it again, because the doing was not a failure of knowledge. It was a failure of something deeper and older and more essential. She did not mention the document. That conversation now belonged to Phyllis and the proceedings, not to this table. She finished her coffee. She stood. "I meant what I said about forgiveness," she told him. "I want you to carry that into everything that comes next, that it's real, and I mean it." She picked up her bag and looked at him with the level, settled gaze of a woman who knows exactly where she stands. "It doesn't change the proceedings, but I didn't want you sitting across from your attorney wondering." She walked out into the November air and stood on the pavement for a moment, breathing it in. She had loved a man who was not what she believed him to be. She had loved him genuinely, with everything available to her. That love was real, even though its object was not. She was not ashamed of the love. She was not diminished by having given it. She was, however, finished. She walked to Phyllis's office with her bag on her shoulder and the document inside it, and she felt, for the first time since the bank notification, something she could name without ambiguity. She felt free. Did you ever discover that something painful in your life had a pattern that started long before you arrived? Chapter 6. The Writing. It started because she could not sleep. Not the anxious, heavy insomnia of the first weeks. That phase had passed, moving through her like a season, and leaving behind something quieter and more workable. This was a different wakefulness. The kind that arrives when a person's interior life has more in it than their days can hold. When thoughts accumulate overnight with a pressure that requires release before morning. She began writing at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday in November. No plan, no audience, no purpose except the need to put outside of herself something that had been living inside her too long and taking up room it was no longer welcome to occupy. She wrote about the airport, not the version she had given other people, the brief, factual account that moved quickly toward the bank notification and the attorney and the practical machinery of what followed. The real version, the way the light fell on his shoulders as he walked away. The specific quality of her love in that moment, genuine and uncomplicated and entirely misplaced, she now understood, but entirely real in the feeling of it. She wrote about what it cost to love someone who was already elsewhere. She wrote about crying at a departure gate for a man who had already left in every way that mattered. Then she wrote about the years before the airport. Not the broad outline of a marriage, but the granular, specific daily texture of what it had actually felt like to live inside it. The mornings, the silences that had grown gradually and that she had learned, without noticing the learning, to treat as comfortable rather than examine as symptoms. The way she had made herself smaller, not in a single dramatic moment, but across 1,000 small ones, each individually reasonable, collectively devastating. She wrote about standing at the kitchen window, looking at the roses the morning after everything. She wrote about her mother's voice on the phone. She wrote about the portfolio on the spare room shelf, waiting. She wrote until the sky began to lighten and the birds started, and her coffee had been cold for a long time. When she finally stopped, she looked at what she had produced and felt the particular vertigo of a person who has told the truth, without knowing how much truth was in them until it was already on the page. She continued the following night, and the next. Not every night. Some nights she slept, and some nights the writing was what she needed, and she learned the difference between them, the way you learn the weather by living in it. She did not reread what she wrote. She simply moved forward, following the thread of honesty wherever it pulled. In early December, Donna came for a weekend. On Saturday morning, while Alex was in the garden, Donna found the pages on the kitchen table. She read the first one. Then she sat down and read them all. When Alex came back inside, Donna had not moved. She was sitting with the pages in front of her and an expression Alex had never seen on her sister's face before, something between devastation and recognition, the face of a person who has found themselves described in language they did not know existed until the moment they encountered it. "Alex," Donna said. She stopped, started again. "Do you know what this is?" "My way of making sense of things," Alex said. "It is more than that." Donna looked at the pages and then back at her sister. "There is a woman, my friend Gail. You met her once, maybe. She left her husband last year, and she has not been able to explain to a single person what the inside of it felt like. Not the events, the inside. She's been trying for 11 months, and the words have not been there." She held up the pages. "They're here. They're right here." She paused. "Can I share one part with her? Just one. Not your name, just the words." Alex thought about it. "One part. No name." The part Donna shared was 3 paragraphs about the experience of making yourself smaller inside a marriage, not because you were forced to, but because another person's comfort had come, over years and without announcement, to feel more urgent than your own presence. About how the smallness happened so gradually that you looked up one day and could not locate the original size of yourself, and could not even clearly identify the moment it had started. Donna texted her the following morning. She had shared it with Gail at 10 o'clock the previous evening. By midnight, Gail had called her crying, not the grief crying of a woman in pain, but the specific releasing tears of a person who has been handed the exact words for something they have been carrying alone and wordlessly for too long. Gail had said through the tears, "I thought I was the only one. I thought if I couldn't explain it, it meant I was wrong about it. But it's here. Someone else felt exactly this and put it into words, and it's real. It happened." Alex read Donna's text, standing in her kitchen in the early morning, and stood very still for a long moment. That was the thing she had not anticipated. Not the legal outcome, not the professional rebuilding. This, the specific, irreplaceable weight of being told that the truest thing you have ever said reached across the distance between 2 people and made one of them feel less alone. That the words had traveled on their own to someone who needed them and had arrived in the right place at the right hour. The words had gone further before long. Gail had shared them with someone who shared them further, and the quiet multiplication of a true thing moving through the world carried Alex's words into lives she would never know. Women in kitchens and living rooms and parked cars who read 3 paragraphs and felt perhaps for the first time that the particular shape of their interior experience had been witnessed. She had not deployed any of this. She had simply been honest at 2 in the morning, alone at her kitchen table, because honesty was what the situation required, and she had finally, after years of smaller calibrations, stopped being afraid of how much truth was in her. She sat with the writing that evening for the first time and read back through it. Not editing, just reading, the way you read something you have been told is yours, but have not yet fully claimed. She read until it was late. Then she made tea and sat at the table and thought about Gail, a woman she had met once briefly who had spent 11 months unable to find the inside of her own experience, and she picked up the pen and opened to a new page. She wrote for Gail. She wrote for every woman who had tried to explain something true and found the language missing. She wrote until it was almost morning, and she did not stop. Have you ever said something true and discovered it was true for far more people than just you? Chapter 7. The ground shifts. She did not orchestrate any of it. This was the thing she knew with certainty and would say clearly to anyone who asked. She did not make phone calls designed to damage him. She did not send the document to his colleagues or his industry or the business community where his reputation had been one of his primary assets. She did not share the writing under her own name or attach it to anything intended to harm him. She simply lived. She was honest when people asked how she was. She continued writing. She forgave him, genuinely and specifically, in every private conversation where his name arose, because that was what she had committed to, and she did not break commitments. The rest happened on its own, because truth, when it exists, does not require a campaign. Edmund Beaumont had been Jameson's business partner for the better part of a decade. He had come to their home for dinners. He had sent appropriate gifts at appropriate occasions. He had conducted himself throughout as someone equally invested in his relationship with both of them, which Alex had always appreciated because it was the rarer quality in people who move in professional circles and must regularly choose which side of a social equation to inhabit. Edmund called Alex on a Tuesday afternoon in January. She did not expect the call. She answered simply, with her name, the way she answered calls she did not recognize. "Alex," Edmund said, "I want you to know that I know what happened." He was quiet for a moment. Not the legal details, the shape of it, the years of it. Another pause, and she could hear him weighing something. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to know that my decision is already made. This is not a call where the answer changes the outcome. I simply want to know from you whether what I understand to be true is true." She told him. Briefly, without performance, the essential facts, the document, the 2 years of planning she had been entirely unaware of. Edmund was quiet for a long time when she finished. "I appreciate you telling me," he said. "I want you to know that what you have conducted yourself with throughout this, the way you have handled it, it has not gone unnoticed by people who knew you both." He paused once more. "Take care of yourself, Alex." The call ended. She did not fully understand its significance until Douglas called Phyllis 3 weeks later to inform her that Edmund Beaumont had withdrawn from a significant joint venture with Jameson, quietly, cleanly, without public statement, on the grounds that the professional relationship no longer reflected the values he wished to operate within. No spectacle, no explanation offered to the wider world. Edmund had simply looked at what he knew and arrived at the conclusion that integrity required, and had acted on it with the decisiveness of a man who did not make this kind of decision lightly, and, having made it, did not reverse it. Jameson would have understood immediately what it meant. There would have been no ambiguity for him in the withdrawal of a partner who had known them both. Edmund had looked at the full picture and made his choice, and the choice was not Jameson. Phyllis delivered this information at their next meeting with her usual professional brevity. Alex nodded once and moved the conversation forward. She thought about it on the drive home, not with satisfaction, not with the particular pleasure of watching consequence arrive, with something quieter, the recognition that integrity has its own gravity, that it pulls the people who possess it toward each other and away from people who do not, and that this sorting, quiet and unannounced, and entirely outside anyone's orchestration, is perhaps the most honest form of justice available in the world. The information about Cara, the woman he had gone to Toronto to build a life with, arrived through Donna in February in the brief, essential way Donna delivered information she had obtained through channels she did not fully explain. It arrived because Cara had asked Jameson direct questions. The document had found its proper legal context, but its existence had become known to the person most immediately affected by it in the way these things become known, through the specific accumulating discomfort of a woman paying close attention to the man she is building a life with and noticing the places where his account of himself does not fully hold together. Cara had asked her questions. She had not received answers she could live inside. She had made her decision with the quiet, self-respecting efficiency of a woman who has learned, at considerable personal cost, to trust what she sees rather than what she is told. She left. Alex received this information and sat with it for a while. She did not celebrate. She did not feel vindicated. She felt, if anything, a private and genuine sympathy for Kara, who had trusted, as Alex had trusted, with the specific vulnerability of a person who loves someone and extends to that love the faith it appears to deserve. Kara had not known, no more than Alex had known. They were not rivals in any story that mattered. They were two women who had been inside the same pattern at different points, and both of them had survived it. The legal proceedings concluded that spring. The settlement was substantial. The document from the shoebox had proved to establish a pattern the court found significant. The LLC structure, examined with Phyllis's thoroughness, revealed the seams of its own construction. Jameson had been thorough. Phyllis had been more so. Alex sat through every proceeding with the same composure she had brought to the first, not because she was suppressing anything, but because she had already processed what needed processing, had done it in the nighttime pages and the kitchen conversations and the long phone calls with her mother. She had processed it privately and completely, and what remained when she sat in those rooms was simply the clear-eyed, steady presence of a woman who knew exactly what she was there for and was not going to be moved from it. On the drive home from the final day, she stopped at a red light and Jameson's name appeared on her phone screen. She looked at it. The light changed. She set the phone face down and drove. She felt nothing. Not rage, not love, not the sharp, specific ache his name had produced in the weeks after the airport. The clean, settled, permanent nothing of a person who has moved entirely past a thing and left it in the place where it belongs. She had heard people describe this moment and had suspected it was constructed after the fact, a story told to make peace with pain that still lived. She understood now it was real. The nothing was real, and it was enormous, and it was the most significant freedom she had encountered in years. She drove home. She made dinner. She sat at the kitchen table and wrote about what the right kind of nothing felt like from the inside. Have you ever waited to feel something about a person and discovered the feeling had simply permanently gone? Chapter 8. Saying goodbye to the house. The decision to sell the house was practical at its core and devastating at its edges, and she made it without self-deception about either dimension. Phyllis had been clear about the financial reality. The settlement, when it fully resolved, would restore a significant portion of what had been taken, enough to rebuild on, enough to begin the next chapter from solid ground, rather than borrowed footing. But the house, with its mortgage and its maintenance and the daily cost of a structure designed for two people now inhabited by one, was a weight she did not need to carry into whatever came next. She made the decision on a Tuesday morning with her coffee and her legal pad, and the same clear-eyed inventory approach she had brought to everything since October. She called the real estate agent. She set the timeline. Then she spent 3 weeks inside the decision before the agent arrived, and those 3 weeks were something she had not anticipated. She moved through the house differently once she knew she was leaving it. Not with grief. Not the backward-looking grief of a person trying to hold on to what is going, but with attention. With the specific and deliberate presence of someone who understands that an ending is also a kind of permission to finally see a thing for exactly what it is. She sat in every room, not dramatically, just long enough to be genuinely present in each space and know that she had been. The kitchen where she had cooked thousands of meals and had her best conversations with Donna and had sat on the floor on the worst night and found that even the floor could hold her. The spare room with the portfolio and the shoebox. The hallway where a photograph of herself at 31 had hung for years, arms raised, face entirely open, the specific joy of a woman who had just done something extraordinary and knew it. She had forgotten that photograph was there for most of the marriage. She had walked past it daily without seeing it. She took it down now and wrapped it carefully and set it with the things she was taking, because wherever she went next, that woman was coming with her. She spent a full afternoon in the garden. She pruned back what needed pruning and fed what needed feeding, and noted what was established enough to survive a transition and what would need new hands to tend it. She did this not because the new owners would necessarily continue it, but because she had cared, and the caring did not stop because ownership was about to transfer. She had loved this garden for every season she had kept it, and it deserved her full attention for its last one in her care. She cut a single rose from the last of the late-season bloom and brought it inside and put it in a glass on the kitchen table. The buyers were a young couple, a woman in her early 30s who moved through the rooms with the hungry, hopeful attention of someone standing at the beginning of something she had waited for. Alex watched her move through the kitchen with her notes and her questions and felt something complex and real move through her chest. Not envy, not nostalgia, a tender and specific recognition of what this house was at its best, what it could be for someone arriving rather than departing. She hoped it would be that for them. She meant the hope genuinely. She walked out of the house for the last time on a morning in March. She had already moved what she needed: the books, the china, the portfolio, the notebooks now filled with 2 seasons of nighttime writing, the photograph from the hallway wrapped in cloth and placed flat in a box with more care than she had given most things she owned. She stood on the front step and looked back once. She did it because the house deserved an acknowledgement. She had lived 12 years inside it, and she had given it everything available to her, and it had held her without condition through all of it, and especially through the last several months when the holding was most necessary. She was not leaving in defeat. She was leaving in the way that people leave things they have loved properly, with gratitude and without clinging. "Thank you," she said quietly. To the house, to the garden, to the roses, to the version of herself that had kept it all standing for all those years, without quite understanding her own strength. She walked to her car and drove to the small apartment 2 neighborhoods away that had a window that caught the morning light at the angle that had made her think, when she first walked through it, of possibility rather than compromise. The apartment was 1/3 of the size of the house. It was entirely, uncomplicatedly, magnificently hers. She spent the first evening arranging it with the specific pleasure of a woman answerable to no preferences but her own. Books where she wanted them, the china in the cabinet she chose, and the photograph of herself at 31 on the wall, directly opposite the front door, so that it was the first thing she encountered every time she came home. She stood back and looked at the room. Small, specific, honest. She made tea. She sat at her small table. She opened the notebook and wrote about what it felt like to be distilled, to have the unnecessary removed and find, in what remained, that the essential was more than enough. Have you ever lost something that felt like it defined you and discovered you were the definition all along? Chapter 9. What Dorothy Left. The letter arrived on a Thursday in late April, handwritten on stationery that communicated age and deliberateness, the kind of paper chosen by someone who believes certain things are worth the time of being written by hand. It was from her Aunt Dorothy, her father's older sister, a woman in her 80s who lived in a small town in the Northern California hills that Alex had visited only twice in her adult life. Dorothy was not a woman Alex knew deeply. She was a woman Alex respected from a distance, private and sharp, and possessed of the specific dignity of someone who had lived a long, entirely self-determined life, and did not particularly need anyone to understand it. The letter said that Dorothy was not ill. She wanted to be clear about that first. But she was old, and being old with clear eyes meant making certain decisions before circumstances made them for you. She had a property, a cottage on 2 acres, where Alex's grandmother had spent the last decades of her life, and where Dorothy had lived since. Dorothy had no children. She had looked at what she had and at who, among all the people connected to her by blood and by the long accumulation of a family's history, seemed to her most suited to the particular character of the place. She had thought of Alex. She was not asking. She was telling. Alex called Dorothy that afternoon. The voice on the other end was old and clear, and carried the authority of a woman who had no patience for anything other than the essential point. "Come Saturday," Dorothy said. "Bring enough for the weekend. I want to show you the property properly, and an afternoon is not enough." Alex came Saturday. The drive north took 3 hours through country that opened gradually from city geography into something older and more patient. Rolling hills, oak trees, the specific quality of Northern California light that belongs to places that have not been hurried into anything. She arrived late morning to find Dorothy on the front porch with coffee and the unhurried expression of someone who had been exactly here for exactly this long and found it entirely adequate. The cottage was small and older than Alex had expected, built in the way things were built when building was meant to last rather than impress. Solid walls, a stone fireplace, windows set deep into their frames, a kitchen that had clearly been the center of every life lived inside these walls. The 2 acres around it were partly wild and partly tended, a combination Alex found immediately and specifically beautiful, the beauty of something living being allowed to be what it naturally is. Dorothy walked her through the property slowly, naming things as they went. The old apple tree that still produced, the section of garden her grandmother had planted, the place by the stone wall where the morning light was best. She spoke about the land with the familiarity of someone who had lived beside it long enough to understand its character, the way you understand the character of a person. That afternoon, Dorothy said, "There is a drawer in your grandmother's writing desk, top left. I have not opened it in years. I think you should be the one to open it." Alex found the desk in the small room off the hallway, worn and small, and clearly kept, not because it was valuable, but because it had been too meaningful to pass on. She opened the top left drawer. Inside was a letter in her grandmother's handwriting. It was not addressed to anyone by name. On the outside, her grandmother had written only, "For whoever needs this place." Alex unfolded it and read. It was not long. Her grandmother had never used more words than necessary. She wrote about the cottage and the land and what they had given her, not in the language of property or inheritance, but in the language of a woman who understood from the inside what it meant to have a place in the world that was entirely and unapologetically yours. She wrote about the specific freedom of a space that required nothing of you except your honest presence. She wrote about what it meant to come home to silence and find the silence full rather than empty. At the end, she had written, "Whoever you are and whatever brought you here, I hope you find what this place gave me, not rest exactly. Something better than rest. Permission. Permission to take up your full space again without apologizing for the size of it." Alex sat at the old writing desk for a very long time. Outside the window, the light was moving across the hills in the late afternoon way of spring in this country, long and golden and entirely indifferent to the smallness of human problems, while being entirely somehow adequate to the weight of human feeling. She walked outside and sat on the low stone wall at the edge of the garden and looked at the hills and the light and the old apple tree, and she cried, not grief. She had given all her grief tears in increments across the months, and she knew the difference between those and these. These were the other kind, the kind that arrive when something long and hard has reached its honest conclusion, when the ending turns out not to be loss, but arrival, when you find yourself sitting in a place that was held for you by people who loved you before you knew you would need it, who trusted that you would find your way here when the time was right. She stayed through Sunday. Dorothy fed her and walked her through the remaining practical details with the efficient competence of a woman tying up the ends of a well-organized life. On Sunday afternoon at the car door, Dorothy took both her hands and looked at her with the direct, unornamented gaze of a woman who says exactly what she means and nothing more. "Your grandmother always said you were the one," Dorothy said, "out of all of them. She said Alex will need this most, and she will know exactly what to do with it." She released Alex's hands and stepped back. She was right, as she generally was. Alex drove home through the long afternoon with the windows open and the spring air moving through the car, and for the first time in the better part of a year, she was not thinking about the airport, or the bank notification, or the legal proceedings, or the empty shelves where his books had been. She was thinking about what came next. Entirely, freely, only what came next. Has someone from your past ever left you something that arrived at exactly the moment you needed it most? Chapter 10. The Life She Chose. By summer, the cottage was hers. Dorothy had moved with characteristic efficiency to a smaller place closer to town, pressing the keys into Alex's hand on a Saturday morning in June with the air of someone completing a task they are entirely satisfied with. Alex drove out with Donna, and they opened every window and spent 2 days cleaning and mending, and by the end of the second evening, they were sitting on the stone wall in the garden, with the hills going gold in the late light, and Donna said, "I cannot believe this is your life now." "Neither can I," Alex said, and meant it as the best possible thing. She divided her time between the city apartment and the cottage. The city for the professional work, quietly rebuilding itself through Gloria's open door and the portfolio that had waited on the spare room shelf for too long. The cottage for the writing and the silence and the particular quality of presence she found in a space that made no demands on who she was supposed to be. On a Saturday in October, almost exactly 1 year from the airport, she gathered people at the cottage. Not a large gathering, not a celebration designed to perform survival or announce arrival. Simply the people who had been real during the hardest year, brought together in the place that represented everything that had remained after everything taken. Donna and Rosalind, who had flown in from Atlanta and spent the first evening walking through every room with her hand trailing the walls as though learning something important. Gloria, who arrived early and stood in the kitchen doorway, taking in the space with the expression of someone recognizing exactly the right environment for exactly the right person. Bernadette, from 3 houses down the old street. Raymond, who arrived with something from his garden wrapped in newspaper and placed it in Alex's hands at the door with the gruff, brief warmth of a man who expresses everything through the gesture and needs no other language. 3 women from the neighborhood who had appeared in their various practical ways across the year, and a woman Alex had never met in person until this afternoon, someone who had found the writing and driven 2 hours simply because she wanted to be in the room with the person who had written it. Rosalind cooked, the cottage filled with the smell of it and with the sound of women talking in a kitchen together and the particular warmth of a space that had been built for exactly this, for the gathering of people who matter, for the full and undefended taking up of room. Alex stood at the edge of the garden in the early evening while the gathering continued inside and breathed the October air and looked at the hill she was learning by heart. Through the open windows, she could hear Donna laughing at something Rosalind had said, and Gloria's voice, and the particular sound of people who are genuinely glad to be where they are. Jameson's name came up once, briefly, in a conversation she passed through on her way back inside. Some detail of how things had resolved in the life he was building with what remained to him. She heard it, noted the faint residual echo of a person who had once been central to her world, and moved through the room as the conversation moved on to other things. At the end of the evening, After the last car had gone down the dark lane, and Donna was in the kitchen, and Rosalind was settled with her book by the fire, Alex went outside one final time. The hills were dark shapes against a sky full of stars. The apple tree was a dark shape at the edge of the garden. The air had the specific quality of October nights in the hills, clean and cool, with the faint smell of wood smoke from somewhere nearby. She thought about her grandmother's letter, permission to take up your full space again without apologizing for the size of it. She stood in the dark and the stars, and she let the full year move through her, not as a narrative she was constructing or a victory she was cataloguing, but as lived experience, as the actual texture of the thing she had been through. The kitchen floor, the portfolio, her mother's voice, the shoebox, the document, Gail, crying at midnight over 3 paragraphs, Dorothy's hands releasing hers at the car door. She thought about the airport. She thought about the tears that had been completely, honestly real. She would not undo them. She would not go back and make herself not cry, would not trade the genuine love she had carried into that terminal for the cold foreknowledge that would have protected her from the moment. She had loved fully and faithfully and without reservation. That was not the mistake. That was the best part of everything she had been through. The proof that she was capable of it, that the capacity was intact, that nothing that had been done to her had reached the place where she kept that. She stood in the dark and the stars, and she felt what she had never expected to find waiting on the other side of this year. Not triumph, not vindication, not the performative wholeness of a woman assembled back into a presentable shape. The real thing. The quiet, radical, extraordinary wholeness of a woman returned to herself, finding, in what was waiting, that she had always been more than enough. From inside the cottage came Donna's voice and Rosalind's answer, and the small, ordinary, irreplaceable sounds of the people she loved moving through the space she had been given. She took one breath of the October air. She turned and walked back inside toward the light. What was the single moment in this story that stayed with you longest? Tell us in the comments. We read every one.